Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Doherty, host of Tall Guy Talks Travel, joined once again by my good friend and co host, Sarah Says.
Hey, everybody.
So, 2026, July 4th, 2026 in particular, will mark the 250th anniversary or the 250th birthday of the United States of America. And this gives us a chance as a podcast that focuses a lot on Disney to take the Disney Plus musical Hamilton and talk about its history and how it represents some of these characters. And if we have that chance, Sarah, I am not throwing away my shot to talk about Hamilton because we have the opportunity. Yes, I thought about that for way too long before
That
we
was a good
recorded
one.
this episode. Now, people who have heard Sarah on the show before probably know that she is a huge Broadway fan. We are going to
Yes.
talk a little bit about Hamilton as a Broadway show. But what people might not realize is both Sarah and myself history majors.
Yes, we
So
are.
we are going to be talking about how some of the characters were portrayed in Hamilton the musical and how that relates to those characters as actual living human beings from history. So, first of all, I think Hamilton is a musical that even people like me who aren't huge musicals fans know and probably have seen since it was on Disney Plus. So this is a really good introduction along with some of the animated Disney movies, especially of the Renaissance, along with things like The Producers and The Wizard of Oz to get people into musicals or to sort of welcome them into that world. So, I know that as a big Broadway musicals fan, this is probably not necessarily one of your favorite musicals because you're probably like, oh, this one you've never heard of is better, or this one you've never heard
No,
of is better.
not at all. My favorite musical ever is Phantom of the Opera. So that's got to say something.
Touche. But I just want to say, as an introductory piece, what do you think of Hamilton as sort of this welcome to the genre?
I love Hamilton. I'm not going to lie. I can't lie. I've seen it twice. And live and then of course on Disney Plus. And every time it's mind-blowing, and it's for literally, they put something in there. Lin-Manuel Miranda, when he wrote this, put something in there for everybody. I mean, King George, his music is like going to those older style of Broadway, which is what is going to rope in people like my parents. Then you have rap and you have all of these cadences and things that is what's bringing in people who are younger. So it really is written to bring all these generations together in one show, and that's not something you see. I mean, yes, I know people who are true purists for like old musicals and things like that, but it's what Lin-Manuel Miranda did with this show really opened up Broadway to everyone, like literally everyone.
And I know that there are some criticisms of this musical as far as it is very much of its time. It is
Right.
very much a musical that was written during the optimism of the early years of President Obama.
Right.
It almost feels like at this point in the country's history, like it's almost a little bit outdated, a little bit quaint. However, when you look at it just as a piece of artwork and somebody trying to take these figures who were all very, very flawed, but
Yes.
had some good ideas, some bad ideas,
Yep.
but to try to recontextualize the American Revolution and to sort of frame it as an underdog story. And then by framing it as an underdog story, being able to welcome other people into the mix, other groups of people, and say, maybe these people who were creating a new country weren't thinking about you, but you can
Mhm.
take these documents as a blueprint. You can take their ideas and build on them to try to create something better. That's very much of the 2008,
Oh
2009,
yeah,
2010
totally.
mindset. But what do you think about that optimism that is all throughout the musical?
Yeah, I agree completely with what you said about how, right now with the way the world is, it's hard to like look at that and not think like, okay, this is getting kind of dated with that kind of show, right? But at the same time, when you're looking at it from like a historical perspective and the way that they use these characters and the fact of Broadway has always been incredibly whitewashed. Like it's not a secret. And the fact that Lin Manuel Miranda brought in so many actors who people were, because I mean, I remember when Hamilton came out and there was like a generation of people who were like, you cannot have a black man playing Aaron Burr. You cannot have a black man playing um why did my mind just Thomas Jefferson. Like you can't do that. But the thing is, it was completely revolutionary, which is get it revolutionary, revolution. but but I think that one thing about this show, like you said, it's so uplifting and all these horrible things happen throughout the show, especially in the second act, that it still is giving this message of hope for something that was an actual historical event. Yes, of course it was changed. Just like movies, just like everything else, you can't like people just don't put the true story of everything out there. That show would be like 8 hours long. so yeah, I think it still resonates, especially with the younger generation. I know many of my friends who have kids who are young teenagers. Their young teenagers have come around now, and they're like, "I love this show," and so it's like it's kind of circling back, where it was our generation that loved it. Now those kids are loving it. So
And I know a story from back in 2020 when everybody was quarantined. So they were doing special like
yes,
Zoom meetings online. And I know that
yep,
there was one about Hamilton
yep,
where a bunch of the original cast got on and talked about their experience. And one of the funniest stories that they told was they asked some of the actors and actresses, what it was like to be cast in the show. And I'm going to try the pronunciation. I'm going to try
okay,
Renee Elise Goldsberry.
correct, yes,
Okay, who played Angelica Schuyler.
yep,
She was offered the role of Angelica Schuyler and she went home and she thought she was going to turn it down because she didn't want to be in this, rap fusion. She thought of herself
right,
as more of a traditional Broadway actress. And her husband said to her, "No, I think you have to do this. I think this is really, really important. And I think that this is something that if you turn it down, you're going to regret it."
yeah.
And then they asked David Diggs, they said, "Did you have, any of the same issues?" And he said, "Well, I did have one question. I asked them if the checks were going to clear." And when they said yes, I took the role. So that's a little bit of a funny story, but I do think that it gets into what we're talking about with the optimism, with the
Yeah,
recontextualizing how, yes, Broadway has been whitewashed, and even the actors and actresses who might normally think, oh, I don't know if I want to be associated with this because I want to
mhm,
be going after these other types of roles.
right.
she realized through her husband that this was important and
Yeah.
this is something that really needs to be made.
Yes.
So I want to talk about some of these representations of the characters, and I think we have to start with, it's Hamilton. We have to
Right.
start with the presentation
Right.
of Lin-Manuel Miranda as Alexander Hamilton. And when we talk about this, we're going to be strictly talking about the Disney Plus version that you
Yes.
can watch right now if you have Disney Plus. So, Lin-Manuel Miranda as Alexander Hamilton, an incredibly talented songwriter, a
Yes.
very talented performer, but somebody who I think you will admit, even as somebody who is not a Broadway aficionado,
Mhm.
I can tell that talent wise, sometimes he is outshined by some of
Yes.
the people he put around him. First of all, I think that's kind of brave to do that,
Mhm.
to know that you're going to be outshined, but to still
Mhm.
cast those people because you want the better show.
Yep.
But what do you think of his portrayal of this character from history?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, one thing I like about having this conversation is I've seen three separate people play Alexander Hamilton, and they've all played him differently. And Lin Manuel Miranda, I mean, he was a creator of this show, and I am definitely a fan of his. I know there's a lot of people that have a lot of hate for this man for some reason, but I kind of think it was almost ingenious that he put so many incredibly talented people around him. I mean, his best friend is George Washington in real life, right? This man is in all of his work. But at the same time, it's like he fits in so well, but it also, for the character of Alexander Hamilton, especially in the first act, you're seeing him as this kid who's coming over from another country to build this life. So he's this weird little guy that everyone's like, okay, like who's this dude? You have Alexander Hamilton coming in around all these people who are already part of this new world and whatnot. He's trying to place himself in there to change. So you wouldn't expect some guy to bust out like operatic, amazing. I mean, he's incredibly talented, but not someone you would expect to come in and just be like, I'm going to blow your pants off right away with my amazing singing voice and my amazing rapping and all of this. And then you kind of see him change throughout the whole show. So I think his portrayal and how he does such a great job, in my opinion, for someone who it just kills me. He always puts himself as the main character in all of the shows he writes. He always is the main character. But I think it worked really well for Hamilton.
So, in his portrayal, I've seen criticisms of the Hamilton movie, or,
Mhm.
well, the musical,
Yeah,
or the
the pro
version
shot.
on Disney Plus, right? And people will say that, for example, the scene where he slaps five with the Marquis de Lafayette and say, immigrants, we get the job done. And he never would have viewed himself as an immigrant. And some of these other things, him being so staunchly anti slavery in the musical, when his anti slavery credentials are a little more wishy washy in real life.
Right, right.
But I think that gets into the recontextualizing that Lin-Manuel Miranda is trying to achieve here, where he's
Mhm.
trying to say, okay, maybe Hamilton wouldn't have viewed himself as an immigrant, but in modern society, we would view somebody like Alexander Hamilton as an
Yes.
immigrant, that people can come from anywhere and influence the national discord. So while it might not be historically accurate, I think
Right.
it's accurate to Alexander Hamilton, the character, if
Yes.
not Alexander Hamilton, the person. And I think we're going to see a lot of that throughout the course of analyzing these characters.
Seeing the change too from the whole part of immigrants, we get the job done, to what you see him do to Lafayette in the second act. You really kind of see the change in the character from young guy full of hopes and dreams to now I'm in the government and this is how I'm changing. So that's another
Right.
thing too.
and now I'm selling out my friend. Good point.
Exactly.
That was a very good point. Leslie Odom Jr. as Aaron Burr, first of all, an incredible performance.
Oh, yes. Oh,
And Aaron Burr, you might not believe this, but in real life was way more of a jerk
yeah.
than even in the musical. Like, you might think, oh, this guy looks like a bad dude in this
Right.
musical. And he was even worse. However, the way they have Leslie Odom Jr. playing Aaron Burr is perfect because you need
Yeah.
this foil to Hamilton. And he was right in the portrayal as Aaron Burr was an opportunist, and
Yeah.
Aaron Burr would do whatever he could to promote Aaron Burr. When he
Yep.
said, when Hamilton asked him, when did you become a Democratic Republican? And he said, well, when it became the
Hmm.
easiest way to get elected to the Senate.
Yeah.
Um, and that was him. Now, he was much worse than that. After he was kicked out of the vice presidency, he
Hmm.
tried to go out west and form his own country and become president of that country.
Wow.
So he was a bad dude. But the way that they play him as this opportunist
Yes.
sort of makes it seem like, okay, that's a relationship with which people can relate. Maybe you
Yes.
can't relate to the person who's so evil that they would go try to start their own country to be president of it, but you can relate to somebody who is just trying to get ahead, who's trying to advance and might sell out people along the way. We even talked about how Hamilton eventually would go and
Hmm.
sell out people along the way. So while you're looking at Burr as this opportunist, you're kind of seeing the reflection of Hamilton in him as well. And I'm sure that you have seen other people portray Aaron Burr,
Yeah.
and I am sure they have done an amazing
Oh, yeah.
job. But the way Leslie Odom Jr. played this character is such a
Oh,
defining version that
yes.
I do think that you're at least going to compare everyone else to him a little.
Oh, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, like I did love the two other gentlemen that I saw that played Aaron Burr. They were phenomenal, but Leslie Odom Jr. is just he is that character. That is him. Like I don't care who's playing Aaron Burr. That is Leslie Odom Jr. I mean, he's back on Broadway. I mean, I don't know if his run is done or not, but back playing Aaron Burr in Hamilton. And so it's like, and he makes, like you said, Aaron Burr was a trash human being. He was a trash human being. But the way that that character is portrayed, I mean, one using him as the narrator for the show is just amazing because you wouldn't think you would be watching a show that's being told through the eyes of the villain basically. And another thing, I they make him so human. Like the humanity they add to him at the end when the duel happens. I every single time I watch that show, I cry when Aaron Burr is singing his part about what did I do? Like, what is this? And I'm like, I know that I should not be crying because this guy is just horrible. But the way that it's written and the way, especially Leslie Odom Jr. performs that, I just feel so bad for him. I'm like, oh my gosh.
This is going to sound like a side tangent, but just recently I was having a discussion with somebody online about MASH, and they were talking about the difference between when Frank Burns was the foil and
Mhm.
when later in the show Charles Emerson Winchester was brought in as the foil, and how much better the show got when the antagonist did have some you had some ability to empathize with the antagonist, right? So even though you don't like Aaron Burr in this,
Right.
his performance and the way Lin Manuel Miranda wrote the part, you can have empathy for the character, even though you know that you don't like the character.
Yep.
And that's one of the great things about this. In real life, Aaron Burr was somebody who was hated by Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams. You can't get those three people to agree
It brings them
on
together.
anything. Arguably, John Adams even kind of liked King George. Like, that's how
Yeah.
that's how bad Aaron Burr was, that you could get those three people to agree that he was trash. Now,
Absolutely.
a performance in Hamilton that I think gets overlooked a lot because of some of the shinier performances. And you mentioned him earlier, Christopher Jackson as George Washington.
Love him.
And he does this incredible thing where Christopher Jackson does not look like George Washington.
No, not at all.
However, if you would have lined up every actor and actress who was in Hamilton and didn't tell me what their role was
Mhm.
and said who's going to play George Washington, I would point at him right
Yeah.
away. Like, you would be like, that guy is George
Yeah.
Washington. And the way that he can command the stage and command that
Yeah.
authority without singing like Renee Elise Goldsberry, like without
Right.
having the veins popping out of his neck as he's hitting
Right.
these notes. Like, he's just solid and
Yeah.
consistent. And that's what you think of when you think of George Washington. We only know him from history books, we only
Right.
know him from other people's accounts. But that's what Christopher Jackson is playing. He's not playing the real George Washington. He's
No.
playing what we think of in
The
our
idea of
minds
him.
and the idea of George Washington, because most people who fought in the Revolution never met George Washington. Most
Right.
people who lived at that time never met George Washington, but he had that commanding figure that just the aura or the thought of George Washington could bring a country together. And Christopher Jackson plays that so well.
Yes.
I don't know how they got so lucky as to get him. I guess you said he does a lot with Lin-Manuel Miranda, so he was
Literally is in
probably
every Lin-Manuel Miranda project in some way. I mean, even Moana, he is the singing voice of the king of the island. The Moana's dad, it is his singing voice, is Christopher Jackson. He's in everything Lin-Manuel Miranda does.
so I'm imagining that in some ways this part was written for him, which
Quite possibly, yes.
probably does work into that, but he just personifies George Washington in a way that I just think is incredible. And I'm going to be bringing this up a number of times during this conversation, but the HBO miniseries John Adams.
Oh, so good.
And first of all, amazing. But a lot of these characters were portrayed in that as well.
Yes.
And I had an old boss of mine told me you have to watch John Adams. And he said, the guy who plays George Washington, it's like they pulled him right off the dollar bill.
That's
And
crazy.
while they did that in John Adams, I feel like they almost pulled the idea of George Washington right off the dollar bill with Christopher Jackson's performance. And you can just see how the aura of this one man kept everything from crumbling, even though, like everybody, he was very flawed, and but
Yes.
he knew what to do. He knew how to act to keep everything together.
Yes.
Before we get to my favorite performance from Hamilton, I want to talk about the elephant in the room, the character who did not appear in the musical, but still played an important part in the musical. And that is John Adams, the aforementioned John Adams. And Lin-Manuel Miranda decided not to include John Adams in this musical as a tribute to the musical 1776,
Yes.
in which John Adams plays a huge role.
He's the main
And
character.
Lin-Manuel Miranda was kind of saying that is the definitive musical role of John Adams. I'm not going to try to recreate that. And I think that that is a good decision for a number of reasons. One, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had their own back and forth at this time. But Alexander Hamilton and John Adams were also fighting at this time. That is a situation where if you introduce another antagonist for Thomas Jefferson, it's just going to make everything too convoluted because you're going to have this sort of three-way hatred. It's going to add too much. And I think
Right.
that that was a really, really good decision to keep John Adams in the background.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm a huge fan of 1776. And I love, oh my gosh, I love the music to that show so much. And it does. It definitely helps zero in on kind of the direction that Lin-Manuel Miranda wanted to take with this show. And it would have been so convoluted with too many storylines otherwise. Because there's a lot going on in Hamilton. There would be a lot going on with Hamilton if he was in it.
Davy Diggs plays both the Marquis de Lafayette, and then in act number two, he plays Thomas Jefferson. He is, of course, amazing as the Marquis de Lafayette, but I want to
Yes.
talk about his portrayal of Thomas Jefferson. And I'm going to get back to the John Adams miniseries where that actor, who hasn't done a lot, by the way,
Mhm.
I've like looked up what he's done and he really hasn't been in a lot, but he plays Thomas Jefferson as Thomas Jefferson. And
Yes.
he's great in it. He is so good. And he's quiet. He doesn't speak up very often. He does his writing, but that's how he communicates with the world. And he's a
Right.
very, sort of behind the scenes character. He's, when they're declaring independence, he supports John Adams in that, but he
Right.
doesn't outwardly give speeches. And that is Thomas Jefferson, the person.
Yeah.
Davy Diggs plays Thomas Jefferson, the monument. He plays Thomas Jefferson, the legend. There's a famous John F. Kennedy quote when the White House hosted a number of scientists and President Kennedy got up on stage and said, "This is the greatest collection of minds ever in the history of the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined alone." Like, he has this reputation of being a larger than life figure,
Right.
but he was like a wilting flower in person in real life. So Davy Diggs plays the reputation and he does it so well
Yeah.
because if you would play that wilting flower that was the real Thomas Jefferson, he wouldn't be a deserving antagonist to
Right.
Alexander Hamilton or to Aaron Burr or to George Washington. You have to play the myth, and he does it so well. What Did I Miss is such a great introduction to his character. And,
Yes.
talking about how, you know, pissed him off until we made a two-party system. Like,
Yep.
he created the divide in the, he didn't create the divide in the country, but John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson really started something that we still see today in some respects in this division of the country: rural, urban, southern, northern. Like, those divisions were started by these three men.
Right.
George
Well,
Washington held it all together, but then George Washington died.
right. Right. One thing going back to what you're saying, about Daveed Diggs's portrayal of Thomas Jefferson is if they would have made him that little wilting flower, his partnership that you see in the Broadway musical with the actor who plays James Madison would have been so blah, because the actor playing James Madison is just so, staunch and like very calm, and it's almost like you have the one really worked up friend that's always like, yeah, yeah, let's do this. And then the one friend who's got like the cool, calm demeanor. And I think that worked so well with the two of them, even though that that's not really what they were like in real life, right? So I think that their choice, or Daveed Diggs's choice to portray him that way, definitely was good in regards to how he was partnered with James Madison as well.
And remember, this was a time when, like we said, people didn't see George Washington.
Right.
Most people never met these figures. Never, they didn't have Twitter. They didn't
Right.
have television where, the president was on TV all
Yeah.
the time and was on the internet all the time. They must have loved their lives so much, by the way.
No kidding, right?
But what Thomas Jefferson was to most of the people who lived in colonial America, in early America, was his writing. And his writing
Yes.
was bombastic. His
Yes.
writing was the way Daveed Diggs portrayed him as a person. So while that wasn't his character, that's what people thought of at the time when they thought of Thomas Jefferson, this charismatic figure, because all
Right.
they ever did was read what he had to say. He delivered his State of the Unions by, or States of the Union, I guess,
Yeah.
by handing a piece of paper to Congress. Like,
Yeah.
he didn't give speeches. So he was known for his amazing writing, and they just portrayed his writing almost as if that
As a
was him
person.
as a person.
Yeah. I have to make a quick side note that's really funny about, so we both love Daveed Diggs, right? And you really love him as Thomas Jefferson, and I really love him as Lafayette. And it makes me laugh because in your office, as I'm looking at you on Zoom, you have him behind you as Thomas Jefferson. Mine is not unpacked, but I have the same pot, but him as Lafayette. So it's
I
like
love him as
we have
Lafayette
each
as
side.
well.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And yeah, the dual roles, just kind of a side note, the dual roles as we're getting into these characters and these historical figures that they did from act one to act two, of moving these actors from uh, Lafayette to Thomas Jefferson, or Hercules Mulligan to James Madison, things like that. It's just, I absolutely love that as well, to see the character shift in these actors.
And like you mentioned before, the Marquis de Lafayette was on Alexander Hamilton's side
Yeah.
during the Revolution, and they were friends during the Revolution, or at least
Yep.
allies during the Revolution. But then during the French Revolution,
Mhm.
Thomas Jefferson sided with the Marquis de Lafayette,
Right.
and Alexander Hamilton did not.
Nope.
So, in some sense, yes, he's playing two different characters, but he's kind of playing one idea.
Right.
He's playing the idea of revolutionary, where Alexander Hamilton was a revolutionary and then he turned into a bureaucrat.
Yep.
Okay, so now we have to move on to Daveed Diggs. Amazing. My
Yes.
personal favorite performance of the Hamilton version that is on Disney Plus. However, a very, very close second has to come from my area of the country, Lancaster County,
Definitely.
Pennsylvania, the pride and joy of Amish country, Jonathan Groff
Yes.
as King George III. You have mentioned already the King George the Third part is a way of taking this hip hop infused modern version of a musical and tying it in to a traditional musical with a
Yes.
traditional musical style while also setting the king as the old world,
Right.
as the old way of doing things, while setting the Americans and the colonists and the revolutionaries as the new way.
Hmm.
Having what Broadway was before Hamilton as the old guard of what the colonies were, and then having this hip hop infused modern version be the change that Hamilton is trying to make both to Broadway and the changes Alexander Hamilton is trying to make to the 13 original colonies. So I think that this is such a great combination of describing the musical and describing the times in which the musical takes place.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I think having this King George character, really to connect the two together to show that is a really good piece because I mean, he's only on stage for a total of like 12 minutes or something crazy like that. It's like hardly any, but he really is kind of the glue, like you said, to bring the two parts of the old world and the new world together and make that connection because then you see in the show when like I believe it's when the Reynolds pamphlets happens, he's on stage with all these other people that normally they do not cross in this show. So he's a really good bridge, I feel, for this.
And I think one of the really important parts that King George III plays in the Hamilton musical, like we mentioned earlier, John Adams is not represented
Right.
in Hamilton as an individual character. He is always off screen, off stage.
Right. He's mentioned,
He's
but never seen.
mentioned, but never seen. So when they come up to King George and he sings the song about how Washington quit, and then
Mm-hmm. And
he
he's
says, "Who's going to
know
be in
him.
charge now?" And then he gets the whisper in his ear and he goes, "John Adams." And he remembered John Adams because he was the ambassador to the court of King James and to Britain. And he knew that he wasn't going to be able to be the force and the figure
Right.
of George Washington. So, since you're not showing John Adams, you need something to encapsulate that. And King George does that. When
Yes.
we talk about Thomas Jefferson being this wilting flower, but
Mm-hmm.
larger than life in the view of his countrymen, John Adams was almost the exact opposite. John
Right.
Adams was loud, opinionated. He gave long, fiery speeches, but because of his appearance and because of some other things, he was viewed by many as being almost this wilting flower when it came to his political influence. When we
Yes.
look back now through modern lenses and we look at somebody like John Adams, he was anti slavery. He
Mm-hmm.
was for, yes, a centralized government, but he was for basically a rule of law. He wanted
Right.
to set things in motion so that people could have these freedoms, but he wanted a strong central government. He was from a big city, at least at the time, what was considered a big city,
Right.
Boston. And he had that more urbane view. And at the time, he was not very powerful. And
Right.
I think when we look back, I wish more men like John Adams were given power because I think, at least in hindsight, he holds many of the views that hold up a little better, especially his son, John Quincy Adams. But this is
Right.
a whole nother discussion. Anyway,
There is a great part that when you're mentioning him and the whole wilting flower is where they Lin Manuel Miranda pulled a lyric out of 1776, directing it at John Adams, who we don't see on stage, and he's like, "Sit down, John," and that's directly from 1776. That's one of my favorite like little nods to this character we don't actually see, and then how you just explained him. It's like you're seeing. It's like, okay, well, this is directing how he may have been treated as the going to be the president, right?
and Jonathan Groff gets to be that voice that says, wait, how is this guy going to take
Yes.
over after George Washington? And that was important. But to also have Jonathan Groff represent the old school, and he is not old school, like he is
Oh,
definitely very talented and very much of the new school, but he can play that traditionalist character in such a way that it really, really worked. And I think when you're watching, especially the version that is on Disney Plus,
yes.
when they can have close-ups of his expressions, and you
Mhm.
see sometimes he's emoting so much that
Yes.
literally like spit is coming out of his mouth. Like,
He's a
I
spit
know it
singer.
can be
It's
a
so
little gross, but you can see how
yeah.
much he is trying to force some of these things, and he is just so talented.
He is incredibly talented, and one thing I think that's really kind of cool about Hamilton is he is and that character is the only main character that is casted by like cast as a white person. All the other characters are diverse people from a diverse population. You only really see in that character because it's like they're trying to stay true to King George, and this is King George, and this is like this fixed piece in history and what he may look like or act like, things like that. I mean, unhinged, but it's really interesting to me that every time you see it. But Jonathan Groff is just fantastic. I have to make a quick side note. There's this hilarious story that every time he'd turn around and walk out in one of the, I think it's after You'll Be Back, he's crossing paths with Alexander Hamilton, and he would take Jonathan Groff would take his staff and like do like golf swings and stuff to try and make Lin Manuel Miranda laugh as he's trying to come in on this very serious like note. And I was like, oh, I just love him so much.
He is great. And on a second side note, I have to bring up that very recently here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he was born and raised and taught how to be an actor and in
Yes.
musicals. He did a drag story time
Oh,
at our local library, and
what?
the funds that were raised from the drag story time made Lancaster Pride that year free for everyone.
That's amazing. That
They
is
just
so amazing.
paid everybody's admission
That's so cool.
to Lancaster Pride because of Jonathan Groff. He is definitely gives back to his community, and that's
Yes.
something that's really, really cool as well. In this portrayal, you mentioned, him being the only white character, and that is part of him representing this old world, right?
Yes.
And it's him representing the way things were done. And of course, we know all of these people in real life were white.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, except for Alexander Hamilton, who was only half white. But even then, he looked white.
Touche. He was at least passing, right?
He was
And
passing.
I think that that is something that is so important in the representation, to have him be this white actor, because he
Right.
stands out so much because
Oh,
of that.
yeah.
And he sings so much differently than
Yes.
everybody else. So that really does portray what they're trying to get across. This next actor, I am sorry, I don't know if this is culturally insensitive. I have no idea how to pronounce his name.
Oh, the actor who plays Hercules Mulligan. And you know what's funny? My mom adores this actor. Apparently he goes by Oak. Um Oki Oked Iate Onao Dewan. Yeah.
Okay, try it one more time.
Oh, sorry. It's like it's phonetically spelled. I'm trying to say it. Okedi Ate Onao Dewan.
Okay. So at least you had a problem too. So if one of us
Yes.
gets canceled, we both get canceled.
Yeah, we can both get canceled. But apparently he goes by Oak, according to Wikipedia.
Okay, so we're going to call him Oak, but he plays Hercules Mulligan and James Madison. So this is another actor who plays one character in Act 1 and a different character in Act 2.
Yes.
I actually have two podcasts. A lot of people might know this. And the other one I have focuses on a lot of Irish heritage. With 2026 being the 250th anniversary of the United States, there are a lot of organizations that are focusing on Irish immigrants and Irish Americans who had a big impact on the United States. And I actually know of an event that is happening in upstate New York in 2026 focused on Hercules Mulligan, who Oak played in act number 1.
Yeah.
This was a spy for George Washington who made his way into the British Army, found a whole lot of different details, and got those details directly to George Washington. So he knew almost every move of the British
Yes.
for quite some time, and he was able to strategize around that. And
Well,
this
even the British needed a tailor.
and this Irish immigrant tailor was able to get in there and was a huge part of how the Americans won the revolution. He almost should have been one of the people slapping five in the immigrants we get the job done,
I know,
because
right?
he
I
was,
don't think a lot of people realize he's part Irish, though. That's the thing. I mean, Mulligan definitely, but I don't think a lot of people like realize that.
and he had a huge influence, and that was a big story. And he played that character amazingly. Like when he bursts out, when you find out he was behind the scenes the entire time, and he just comes out like roaring, and it is such a good scene. And then he
Yes.
plays James Madison in Act
Yes.
2, which is a great counteract to Thomas Jefferson kind of following him around like a little puppy, which is very true.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And also how he's always very sickly. Like that was something
mhm.
about James Madison. But once again, the architect of the Constitution and
Right.
somebody who was a very, very important founding father, but he was sort of the coattails of Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And kind of going to the casting for the Disney Plus and everything. I think they did like he's absolutely phenomenal. I love him, but I do have to give a shout out, even though he'll probably never hear it. Fergie Philippe, I think is how you say his last name, was my very first Hercules Mulligan. And he is right now, he's actually on tour playing the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, but he just like made me love that character so much. Like it's yeah, Hercules Mulligan is such a great character. And like how you talked about that switch when he goes to then being kind of like the distinguished and quiet. And it's yeah, so good.
And there's one character from the Hamilton musical that is essentially not a character at all. And that is Ariana DeBois, who
Yes.
plays the Bullet.
The Bullet, yes. Yes, which doesn't even have a name in the program.
And I think that if you go back and watch Hamilton, if you didn't do this before, keep an eye out for, quote, the bullet.
Yes.
Because as you are watching this musical at different points when Hamilton is moving around screen, the bullet is always sort of staying within range of him during a
Yeah.
lot of these different scenes, moving with him in a way that is different from the other characters who are
Yeah.
even dressed similarly. And it is really interesting how they show this one character who is the bullet
Yeah.
popping up periodically because this is how it's going to end for Hamilton.
Right.
He doesn't know it, but we all know it. And I think that was such an ingenious aspect to add to this movie, to this musical, is to
Right.
have this one character that represents the thing that's going to happen to him that we know and he doesn't.
Yeah, the one thing too is they make her a lot stand out a lot more in the pro shot because when you when Hamilton first came out, it was a very subtle thing. And you didn't realize what this was until the very end where you see during it and she walks by like and she's holding it before it hits Hamilton, right? Um, but in the pro shot, they made her a lot more noticeable, I feel, which is still great because as you know this character and you're kind of seeing how it's surrounding. So if you ever do get a chance to see Hamilton live on stage, you will notice there's like a huge difference because she is so subtle as part of the ensemble that then when it happens, you have this moment of like, oh my gosh, like it is like this mind blowing moment of this girl has been here the whole time. I mean, she's even in, she is the one who whispers to the king when John Adams becomes president. And she has all these just little places she pops up that you don't think about, like you said, until it makes this connection. And it's really interesting.
And that whispering to King George that you mentioned, and she is the one who tells King George that John Adams is the new president. And that is one of the dominoes that falls
Mhm.
that leads to Aaron Burr shooting Alexander Hamilton. Once he doesn't have Washington by his side anymore, he is kind of a powerless figure at that point
Exactly.
because John Adams doesn't trust him.
Right.
He's not a Democratic Republican, so he doesn't fit in anymore once John
Mhm.
Adams takes control of the government. So that is one of those early dominoes that falls that ends up leading to him being shot by Aaron Burr. So it's such an important aspect that they have her be the one to tell King George that this transfer of power has occurred.
Yeah, there's a lot of little nods in there that as you watch, like I said, they do make it a little more obvious in the pro shot, but you still do need to watch because as you watch Ariana DeBose's character like go around, it's like, oh my gosh, the more you watch it, the more you really pick out what she is doing that is setting the wheels in motion for the end of this show.
And I like that they do focus more in on her in the pro shot because I
Yeah,
don't think you're really thinking about it the first time you watch the musical.
right,
And I don't think a lot of people are lucky enough to see Hamilton two, three times on
right.
Broadway. So they're not going to
I didn't
pick
see
up
it on
on it
Broadway.
when they're seeing it in person, even off Broadway,
Yeah, seeing it on tour,
is
definitely, but it is
still
definitely a different experience, so
a once or twice in a lifetime
oh,
experience
yeah,
for most people.
totally.
So you're not going to pick up on some of those things when you
Right.
see it in person. So having it be more of a focus of the pro shot
Yeah.
was a really, really good decision. I know that Philippa Sue, who plays Eliza Hamilton, Renee Elise Goldsberry, who plays Angelica Schuyler, and Jasmine Cephas Jones,
Yes.
who plays Peggy Schuyler. They are very important to this musical, and I want to mention them, especially the job that Renee Elise Goldsberry does. I mean, she is so good in this.
She's phenomenal. I mean, they all are phenomenal, but that is a tough, like, that's got to be a tough track to play, is Angelica Schuyler, because it is emotional.
And this isn't as much a part of the history because I think a lot of this is added to the musical
Yes.
I mean, even the insinuations that there was something romantic between Angelica and Alexander Hamilton,
Right.
not necessarily supported by facts, but it adds a dynamic that I think a lot of people need. I think if this was just a political, historical account and it didn't have some sort of romantic storyline or
Right.
some sort of relationship storyline, I don't think it would have been as big as it has gotten. And the fact that these three ladies just
Yeah.
absolutely brought it
Oh my
in the
gosh.
pro
And
shot
like,
version.
you know that as well, like their song, the Schuyler Sisters, and they're talking about and talking to Thomas Jefferson, including women in the sequel, all this stuff, that it's really like hyped up from what really was going on at the time, right? And so having that female power kind of like behind it, like my big history studies were about women in the United States, and like especially during the Western expansion, things like that. That's where my kind of niche is. But I love seeing, even if it is not historically accurate, I love seeing historical shows that have incredibly powerful women in it that are like, we are going to change this.
And I think that is an important song too, because one of the things that Hamilton tries to accomplish as a musical is making New York City itself a character
Yes, it really does. Yeah.
and
Because I never would
centering
have thought of that.
Hamilton as a New Yorker.
Yes.
That is a big sense in the tension between
Yes.
both him and Aaron Burr and him and Thomas Jefferson. You know, he created Wall Street essentially. Like
Mhm.
Wall Street exists because of Alexander Hamilton, and the greatest city in the world
Mhm.
lines. It just creates this atmosphere where New York City plays a part in the musical, not just, the seats of government. Even though I know for a lot of that time, New York City was the seat of government, but
Right.
they center him as this figure from New York. Even the compromise that he comes
Mhm.
up with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison involves moving the capital of the United
Right.
States closer to Thomas Jefferson so that Alexander Hamilton can move the financial situation of the United States closer to New York. There's a lot of those bounce backs and symbolisms. And when you talk about that one song being
Yeah.
such an important part of the
Right.
musical, not just to address the fact that women were not involved in this, and
Right.
we can change the races of some of these characters to show different things, but they don't change the gender of any characters.
No, they
They
don't.
understand that this is a group of people who, even after slavery ended, black people had the vote before women had the vote.
Right.
So it was very telling and a very important song in the entire structure of this musical.
Yeah, kind of going back to what you were saying about New York being kind of like its own character in the show, is I just want to make a note. A lot of people don't think of New York being big during the Revolution. They know of battles that happened there. Even my son, we're at Cub Scout camp, and the whole theme was the Revolution because of the anniversary. And they made a comment about the cannons being stolen. And my kid turns to me and he goes, "That happened in Hamilton." And I'm like, it did. He goes, we steal their cannons. I'm like, yes, they did. But you think about, when you think about the revolution, you think about the Carolinas and you think about Pennsylvania and like places like that, where at the time, like in 1776, it was like all that happened, like Philadelphia area and all of that. And then the revolution basically ended in the Carolinas. And you don't think about that. I mean, I live in the Carolinas now, and I had this moment where I was like, I know this, but I didn't ever have it click in my brain until I heard a, a revolutionary reenactor talking about these places that I drive by constantly now were such a huge part of the revolution. I'm like, what? What? I mean, growing up on the West Coast, you don't feel that. So I think that, like you were saying, New York being this set, it's like, oh my gosh, New York was a big part of this. And it is in its own right, in that song, especially too, its own character.
When George Washington was trying to hold New York and the British were attacking, and eventually George Washington had to retreat,
Yeah,
the path on which George Washington retreated is what is now Broadway.
that's crazy. It's
So
so
when
like
you think
so
about it,
interesting.
it's like George Washington was retreating from the British and walking exactly past the theater where
Yeah,
eventually this musical would show. And when you contextualize it like that, it does show you that, yes, New York was a super important part. As a matter of fact, when you talk about loyalists and revolutionaries, when you talk about people who wanted independence versus people who wanted to stay
right.
colonies, the people in New York were doing just fine. They were
Yeah,
making
right.
their money trading with
Yep.
England. They were perfectly happy to stay part of the British realm. It
Yes.
was Boston and some of these other cities that
Yeah.
wanted to break away. And some
Well,
of
like
the
North
southern
Carolina
states,
was the first to go away, like break away, as North Carolina was like literally the first state to be like, I'm out.
while South Carolina was one of the last.
Exactly. And we're
So
connected, for crying out loud.
it is one of the things that gets stressed because of the way that this was written. And, you know, there might be a lot of people who listen to the podcast who aren't big musicals fans. And
Yeah.
if you're not, I'm kind of surprised you made it this far into the second episode about this musical.
We appreciate you being here.
But if you haven't seen Hamilton, I recommend, while we're celebrating the 250th
Yeah.
anniversary of the United States, warts and all,
Yep.
it is a very imperfect union. And it was started by imperfect people.
Yes.
And Hamilton the musical really shows that in a way that I do think keeps you kind of positive for the future, even though they were not perfect people
Right.
and they had flaws and they were big flaws. Like, when you talk about somebody having a flaw and it's like, oh, now we talk about politicians with $200 haircuts or whatever. Like,
Right.
they owned people. Like, they were
Exactly.
big flaws.
Yes.
However, if you're trying to have some sense of optimism that eventually the long arc of history will bend towards justice, I think that this musical, Hamilton, and specifically the pro shot version on Disney
Yes.
Plus, provides you with that. And as we talk as Disney fans,
Hmm.
we understand that the United States is not perfect, but there are glorified moments in the Disney theme parks, Main Street
Absolutely.
USA
Yes.
and Frontierland, and all of these places that show maybe not what history really was like,
Yes.
but what we wish history was like.
Yeah,
And
it's like the movie version.
right, and we can try to take things from what we wish history was like and take those actions and those vibes and put them into real life.
Yes, absolutely.
Sarah says, do you have anything else to say about Hamilton before we wrap up this conversation?
No, I mean, if you haven't seen it, go watch it on Disney Plus. If you have seen it, go watch it again because like Rick said, we are at the anniversary 250 years. That's a big deal considering we're like a little baby country. So so
A
yes,
quarter of a millennium.
I know. It's an exciting time and a not so great time. So go and watch something and have some fun.
All right, one last thing before we go here. What is your favorite song in Hamilton?
Oh, my favorite song. Okay, this is like totally cliche, but it's You'll Be Back. But it's because it was the only song that would get my kid to stop crying when he was a baby. When we played it, we'd play it over and over and over, and it would make him stop crying every time. And so You'll Be Back is my favorite song.
That has one of the greatest lines in the entire musical when he says, I will kill your friends and family to
To
remind you
remind
of
you
my
of
love.
my love.
Such a great line. And of
So good.
course, Jonathan Groff, one of the only people who could have delivered it
Oh,
properly.
absolutely.
No surprise on my end. It's What Did I Miss?
Such a good song too, though. So many cool little history tidbits stuck in there.
So many great history tidbits, but also when you think of the Schuyler Sisters song as being the one that sets
Mhm.
up Act One, I
Yep.
mean, What Did I Miss is literally the
It
start of Act
opens act
Two.
2. Yeah, it's great. It's yeah. Yeah.
And it really basically says this is what the rest of this musical is
It
going
is
to
it
be about
sets
here.
the tone for the rest of the show.
Sarah says, thank you so much for being back on the show.
Thank you. I loved this topic.